What's up, y'all? One Piece, One Life here, and guys, I really feel like Zoro in that one chapter. You know, the chapter where Zoro, Lucci, Luffy, and Kaku were fighting against the Seraphim, and Zoro had to have that epiphany of, duh, I fought King. I should have pieced it together sooner. That's what I feel like not just me, but the entire One Piece community is feeling like about the state of the current One Piece world. Because guys, we all know now that Oda spelled it out for us. The One Piece world is sinking. But honestly, we should have put it together sooner, because there is a lot of evidence all throughout the story that points to this conclusion. And that's kind of what I want to go over today, which is all the evidence that we had that this was the conclusion that Oda was leading towards the conclusion that the One Piece world is going to be submerged in water. And you might think that there's just a few key moments, but guys, there's a lot to consider. But before we get to the list, y'all, please do me a solid. Like the video, okay? Subscribe to the channel for more One Piece content just like this. Guys, we are so close to the coveted 100 subs. I would really love it, really appreciate it if you guys could push me just that little step further, you know, so that I can validate my life choices and share it around with all your friends who love the series or who love anime and manga in general. Get them to subscribe too. Now we're gonna start these lists the way that I tend to always start these lists, just because it makes more sense to me, which is chronologically. So going in order, the very first thing in the story that could kind of clue us in to the fact that the world is gonna be submerged is the fact that the Baratier is a floating restaurant. So during the Baratier arc, when we were first introduced to the concept, personally, I just thought, okay, cool. This is just something that Oda wants to do because, you know, it's different. One Piece is a world covered by water, so of course we gotta have some restaurants on the sea as well as on land. So, you know, we're just trying something different. But now you think back and you say, why did the Baratier need to be floating? Hint, that is going to be a major key part to a lot of the things on this list. The fact that they're floating. Because by seeing it float, this could be Oda's way of saying, even from way back then, I have a vision for the story where a lot of islands, a lot of places are gonna need to be floating like in this way, because a lot of the world is gonna be submerged. Tides are gonna rise, and if you don't have a way to cope with it, then you're done. Another piece of evidence that we kind of learned in the Baratier arc, but we don't really get context for how this could tie in until we learn about the red line, is the all blue. Cause see, when Sanji first tells us about it, it just seems like, you know, it's his dream, kind of like the One Piece. It's just something that you have to find somewhere in the world. But with the introduction of the red line, and we learn how it is the main divider of the entire world, that sparked all the theories that, you know, common theories like the red line needs to be brought down in order for the all blue to be created. But think about it, if the red line comes down, the One Piece world isn't just infinite space, right? So just like when you drop something in water, that water is going to be displaced and likely rise, especially if you're dropping something the size of a continent that spans the entire world. So I think that just by having the thought in people's minds that the red line has to come down, a byproduct of that is going to be the rising of the tides. Now when we get to Reverse Mountain, we meet Crocus and Laboon, and the fact that Crocus is living inside a whale. Now of course, during the arc itself, everyone knew that the connection that Oda was trying to make there was, you know, taking reference from the story of Jonah in the Bible, where he lived inside a whale, and obviously putting his comical One Piece spin on it, because Crocus is a joker. But remember that the overarching theme of all the evidence that I can give in this video is that people in their different ways have manners of escaping or avoiding the flood. So of course, Crocus, living inside Laboon, an animal that lives in the sea, he'll be safe. And the thing about Crocus that makes him extra interesting is the fact that he was with Roger's crew when they found out the truth on Laugh Tale, which means he may have prepared all of this in advance because he knew, or some part of what they learned there told them that this was going to happen. Remember this when we get to Sabaody. The next little piece of information that I got is something that we got from Vivi in Aramelu in Alabasta. If you don't remember, which I don't blame you because this was such a short section of the story, Aramelu was once called the Green City of Alabasta, and a lot of people lived there. It was a thriving community. But then there were two things that caused it to be ravaged and had all the people fleeing. One was obviously the desertification made by Crocodile stealing the dance powder so there was no rain, and then using his own sand powers to make it a desert. But the second is that there seems to be an encroachment of water where the rivers that used to be natural, fresh water, started to be encroached on by salt water and replaced by salt water, indicating that tides were rising such that they were literally coming onto the land. Now, the thing that's interesting about this is we would literally hear this small tidbit from Vivi and never bring it up again, which makes you ask the question, why would Oda bother putting that in there if it wasn't going to connect back to something? Because I can even see it now in one of the next few chapters, Vivi saying, oh, so maybe that's why Aramelu was starting to get encroached on because of this. And it would connect it all back to Imu, connecting Alabasta back to Imu, because we know that Alabasta and Nefertari Lily also have a connection there. Next up, we hit the Skypiea saga, and let's just talk about the whole concept of Sky Islands in general. Because if you're talking about wanting to be safe from an encroaching flood, being high up in the sky is about as safe as you're gonna get. Even safer than being on the Red Line. And we all know, of course, that Skypiea is a microcosm for the whole story of One Piece, because it even shows a world separate from, I guess, what people would refer to as the commoner realm, being controlled over by a god that needs to be defeated so that everyone can, live, which ties into the fact that that's how Mary Joa is for the Celestial Dragons, and that's why, again, they're relatively safe from all of this, as opposed to everybody else who's living down on the Blue Sea. And then staying in Skypiea for a bit, we also get the fact of Enno going to the moon. Now, while we know that the reason Enno wanted to go to the moon is different because he just wanted to attain the fairy Verth or whatever, you gotta still wonder if that has something to do with the current situation. Because think about it, the only way you can be safer than being high up in the Sky Islands is not being on the planet at all. Now, I'm not saying that Enno knew any of this, because let's face it, Enno doesn't know much things. But as far as foreshadowing goes, this could be Oda telling us he's having the right idea because he's trying to get away. Then we reach the evidence that most people will immediately point to when talking about this, and that is Water 7 and how it is currently being flooded by Aqua Laguna. Now, I wouldn't blame you if you forgot about Aqua Laguna, because admittedly, Water 7 had a lot of other things going on. The introduction of Frankie, Luffy versus Usopp, Robin's disappearance. But Aqua Laguna, regardless, remained a threat that especially Iceberg was always wary about. A tsunami so huge that it threatens to flood the entirety of Water 7 every year, and they need to continuously build up. This is the first plain as day evidence in terms of literally the sea rising, because we're seeing it on a micro scale on Water 7. But if we're seeing a similar situation on Water 7, then maybe the solution that Water 7 is trying to take is the solution that can apply to the world. If you don't remember, one of the things that Iceberg was trying to do was to make Water 7 a floating island, in terms of not having the island connected to any land at all, so that it can float on its own. And honestly, I think that this is about as good as we're gonna get for a solution. I mean, island-wide floating? That's gonna save millions. And the best part is, if the Water 7 people can make it, I'm sure that there are other scientists around the world. There are a lot of smart people who could figure it out too, and figure out that that's what they need to do. Heck, for all we know, Vegapunk may have already been doing that, planning for this. Maybe that's just one of the island-wide things that he's been creating, one of his many inventions. Then another part which is heavily brought up in terms of this discussion is the hole of Enies Lobby. You know, the giant hole under Enies Lobby that, as far as physics go, should be impossible. Which, I mean, we now know was caused by seemingly the ancient weapon Uranus being used way back in the day. But could this have been the first one? Or at least Oda showing us that, yes, this is gonna come back in a large way later, which now it has. There's two things I want to bring up about this. One is the Enies Lobby one the first one that ever happened, or just the first one that we see? We know that every time that the weapon is used, sea levels rise by approximately 1 meter, and Vegapunk just told us that it's been about 200 meters to cover, you know, the ancient world. meaning that it's been used, at least throughout the past few centuries, 200 times. But who knows if the Enies Lobby one was the very first one. And there's evidence to that in that that's where a government stronghold is. So maybe wherever the old ancient kingdom was where Enies Lobby was now. They blew it up and then said, well, listen, we can put our government there as a ha-ha, screw you joy boy. And the second thing I want to bring up is the concept of drainage. Because guys, there's a hole in the ocean, but where is that water going? Like, think about it. Obviously, the sea level is rising because as it's creating the hole, the water on this side is, kind of increasing, going that way. But the hole isn't collapsing on itself the way you think it would. My best answer to what's happening in terms of this is that the One Piece Earth and our Earth are similar in constitution, in that there's going to be a mantle, inner core, and outer core. So what I'm assuming is that when they use the laser and it creates the hole goes all the way to maybe even the inner core. Then the water pours into the hole, but the inner core is superheated, so it evaporates all the water that it goes into. So then as the water pours down into there, it reaches the inner core and gets evaporated, because the inner core is disgustingly hot. But then again, that's also techie, because if that was the case, then why hasn't all the water been drained? Especially if water is just continuously being poured in. I don't really have a good answer for this one, guys, but let's think back real quick to what Iceberg is trying to do. Because Iceberg's whole process of trying to make an island into a ship, or at least some sort of floating device, has already been done. And it was done by one of the most lazy people in the entire story. Because the next piece of evidence is that Thriller Bark was transformed from an island into a ship. A ship that got into the Grand Line, no less. I do believe it was Moria who was the one who, made it into a ship. I'll need to go back and check, but I believe it was. And again, I'm not suggesting that Moria knows something, some sort of deep, dark secret, or knew that this was happening, but I just find it interesting that a lot of people are coincidentally seemingly having the same idea over and over again, which is we need to make sure that we can float. Remember how when we were talking about Crocus, I said to remember him for Sabaody? Now we're here and we're talking about Rayleigh, and specifically the fact that his job is being a ship coder. Because my thought here is the same as with Crocus. He was literally right beside Roger when they found out the truth. So if he knew that this was going to happen, his thought would be, okay, what is something that I can do to at least try and help or try and work within the fact that this is something inevitable, something that we as the Roger parents cannot change. And so he took up ship coding to prepare people, because he knows that ship coding is going to be very important. When you look at it through this lens, just a lot of One Piece comes together. Moving on from there, we get just the concept of fishmen in general, because again, you have the fact that fishmen themselves will be safe from flooding. In fact, I don't even think it may affect them because they already live in the water. But beyond that, there's a lot of things within Fishman Island itself that ties itself to what's going on right now. The first one being Charlie's prophecy that Luffy will destroy Fishman Island, because it lends a lot of credence to the theory that I said earlier, which is that the Red Line is going to be brought down. So a lot of people think that Luffy is going to be the one, inadvertently, obviously not meaning to bring the Red Line down, inadvertently causing the byproduct of rising tides. And then you have the Noah. The lore about the Noah makes so much sense once you connect it to everything else that we know now. Based on Noah's Ark, it's supposed to carry the entire populace of the world. It just makes too much sense. And before people say it's only meant to carry the people of Fishman Island, I think it's much bigger than that, because think of it this way. In our world, everyone in the world can't fit on one landmass or one island. That's been scientifically calculated out. Now, we can't live there because, obviously we can't live there. It's not enough space to live. But as a temporary means of transportation, temporary solution, definitely it'll tie it back to its inspiration being Noah's Ark, where after the world was flooded, all of the animals that came with Noah were safe on the Ark. And it would tie really well into the themes of slavery, racism, and prejudice, because everyone will have to come together regardless of how highborn, lowborn, or race that they are. And kind of going along with Fishman Island, but also separate, is Jinbei's cover story. Because in Jinbei's cover story, we see these ancient ruins just sleeping below the water. And at that time we had no context of why are there just random ancient ruins down here. But now we know what it was for. It's because of the continental fragments that Oda just told us about in one of the most recent chapters, where obviously these ruins were on land before, but with the rising tides, the world, ancient world, has been submerged. As we go through the New World, going through Punk Hazard and Dressrosa, there's a bit less about the flooding itself until we get to Zoe, and we see that Zoe is on the back of Zunisha, the super elephant. And again, what's the major overarching theme of all the evidence in this video? That various people are gonna have their methods of surviving the flood. The minks are literally on the back of one of the tallest entities, if not the tallest living entity known to man. So I think that they're gonna be perfectly safe. And with Zunisha tying into Joy Boy's story directly through them being companions, Zunisha may even have a role to play in saving others. Who knows, maybe that's how Zunisha makes it up to Joy Boy, so that it's not always just apologizing all the time. I don't know, I need to see more from you, Super Elephant. And then we have two pieces of evidence from the most recent arcs, where in Wano towards the end, we learned that the old Wano is lying submerged below the water with the new Wano being built on top of it. We're told this by Sukiyaki because we literally see a diagram of how water was caught within the two walls and just continuously rose and flooded, so they had to keep building up, which again brings rising tides to the forefront of our minds. And then of course, the most obvious thing that was literally at the start of this Egghead arc, the destruction of Lelouch. And I just want everybody to think back to the chapter that Lelouch was destroyed, because I think this is when people actually realized, okay, we're in the endgame. And it's not because of anything that Oda told us necessarily, but more so the fact that he showed us that this one event has ties to so many things that we had been trying to collate over the years. Enies Lobby, Fishman Island, the World Nobles. Oda's really tying this all together in a package that makes so much sense. So see, when you bring all this evidence together, it's a no-brainer that the endgame was flooding. Now the question is just gonna be, how the heck is Luffy gonna be the one to deal with that? Well, I mean, I do have an answer for that if you watch this theory right here, which, I mean, part of it has already been proven false, but hey, part of it can still happen. What do you guys think about all this evidence? Is there any more that I missed? You know, One Piece is a large story, so I wouldn't be surprised if I missed something. If I did, let me know in the comments. And also let me know just what you think in general about the direction that we're heading towards and how we're gonna get out of it. That's the end of the video, y'all. But guys, before we go, please like the video, sub to the channel for more One Piece content just like this. We're so close to 100, guys, please. And share it around with all your friends who love this series. Remember, I'm trying to make a community, but I need your help to do it. That's gonna be all from me. I'll catch y'all on the next one. And always remember, One Piece, one life. Nah, because y'all, I don't think we're understanding. The world is flooding. This is a catastrophe level event. Like, I'm just trying to think about what would happen, the chaos that would ensue in our world if this announcement was made like tomorrow. As I'm saying that, I'm remembering that this is literally already happening, just at a much slower pace. I mean, melting glaciers, all the destruction that we're doing to the habitat. Y'all, we need to step up our conservation game if we don't want to end up like the One Piece world. Cause I don't know about y'all, but I don't think we're gonna be getting the Atlantis that Fishman Island is.